Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Paddock Project. I'm your host, Tiggy. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see a very different background than what you're probably used to. It's because I am in Nairobi, Kenya for a few weeks. So luckily, I got to watch this race at 10 a.m. instead of what would have been midnight my time. There were so many firsts this weekend. We had Lewis's first win in red. We had Oscar's first pole. We had 3 cars disqualified, which we'll get to. We had Haas double points. There were some exciting storylines this weekend, even if it wasn't the most exciting race overall. But the weekend had a lot of excitement to make up for that with the sprint, with F1 Academy, which we'll be doing a recap for. So stick around for that at the end. And yeah, for Shanghai, the track was completely resurfaced. I was a little surprised and caught off guard watching practice to see the same Louis Vuitton branding. I kind of thought that since it was the Louis Vuitton Australian Grand Prix, it was special to that one, but I guess we should expect it at more races, which not necessarily complaining about. Also, I'm recording solo, as you can probably tell here, and that's because it is very early. So this is one of the rare times that I'll be doing a solo recap, but excited to chat with you all and share my thoughts. So, for some quick news before we jump into the weekend, unfortunately, it was announced right as the weekend was kicking off that Eddie Jordan had passed away. He is a former F1 team owner of Jordan Grand Prix, who had a team for 15 years from 1995 to 2001. He was also, that team was the home of Michael Schumacher's debut. Eddie Jordan also managed Adrian Newey, so he oversaw the move and the transfer from Red Bull to Aston Martin recently, which incredible. We have a lot to thank this man for. Yeah, incredible man. Really nice to see all the tributes over the weekend. So getting into a quick in case you missed it, starting with the sprint. It was 19 laps, no pit stops, and main headline, it was Lewis's first win in red. Just absolutely incredible. I woke up really early to watch this in Kenya and was just over the moon. It was so beautiful. It was dominant. He won by 7 seconds. So nice to see Anthony Hamilton, his father, so happy in the garage and just proving all the haters wrong. I think my favorite race or my favorite moment from the post-race interview was him saying that all the people yapping out there just like don't really know what it takes to hop in a new car and do this. So incredible for him. It was fun to see a Lewis Max 1-2 start, which I think brought us back to 2021 all over again, but an incredible start by Lewis to stay ahead and just flawless driving the entire race, especially with Max breathing down his neck for a lot of the race. So he was still within 0.3 seconds on lap 9. So it wasn't like Lewis just had to like cruise out front. He was really having to race hard and earned this. Russell passed Leclerc for 4th on the first lap. One of the other main talking points from the sprint was that Lando had an issue with the car. The engineer was just like, how can we help? And there wasn't much they could do. It was strange because Piastri was keeping up with Verstappen, no problem, and even had an amazing pass of him on lap 15 to take P2. And there was a similar dynamic with the difference between Lewis and Charles's cars as well. So Charles called the car undrivable at one point, and meanwhile Lewis was just cruising out in front and got sprint pole and won the race by 7 seconds. So it was interesting to see the dichotomy there. There was a final lap incident and a yellow flag caused by Doohan, who tapped Bortoleto, which spun him around, caused a little bit of a traffic jam buildup. But the top 10 for the sprint were Lewis, Oscar, and Max on podium, then George, Charles, Yuki, Kimi, Lando, Lance, and Fernando Alonso. It's very nice to see Lewis and Max very cordial with each other, and Max was very supportive of that win. So it was nice to see that come full circle a bit. For the race, in case you missed it, here is the main strategic decision for the race was a 1-stop versus a 2-stop. And almost all initially opted for a 2-stop, but the hard tires performed much better than anyone I think expected, especially after seeing Lance Stroll just do a masterclass in tire management. So many managed to make it till the end. Another big talking point was dirty air, so much so that Lando, who was P2 at the time, was actually wanting Piastri to pull more ahead of him so he could escape the dirty air, which is wild when you're in P2 and you're asking for your teammate to pull ahead of you, who's in P1. It also broke Yuki's front wing, which I don't know if I've ever seen that before, like dirty air, literally the turbulence just hitting it and breaking it. We had an Oscar, George, and Lando top 3 start. Lando passed George in one of his better starts of his career. I agree with everyone who's been saying that Lando has practiced his starts in the off season. Alonso had to retire really early on with a technical issue. I think it was a brake fire. And then the main talking point, I feel like, in the early part of the race was the Ferrari team order drama. So Hamilton was told by his engineer to let Leclerc through. Even though Leclerc had a damaged front wing, he was still the faster car. And it seemed justified at first because Leclerc caught Russell, who was ahead of them, but wasn't able to pass. And then he made a mistake and fell back a couple seconds. So it seemed tough. And I think we saw a lot of radio woes between the Ferrari drivers and their engineers, which seems to be a bit of a theme so far this season. But Hamilton was like, I need some feedback, guys. Like, come on, give me something. And they said something, and he was like, yeah, you told me that already, just clearly being like, you're not helping at all. And then Leclerc's engineer at one point was like, we're losing some time on turn 2. Maybe try a lap without using the curb. And Leclerc just goes on the radio, nope. Like, David Coulthard was so funny for this. He was like, imagine telling a driver who's done the same racing line for 35 plus laps to just like all of a sudden use a different racing line, which I guess it kind of makes sense if you're seeing in the data as an engineer that it's turn 2, like try doing something different so you're not losing time. Kind of makes sense to me, but Leclerc's response was very much like, no, thank you. The engineer at one point as well was trying to tell him something, and he was like, I know, you told me 10 or 15 times. So the Ferrari boys were not loving the radio situation. One other funny radio moment I have to give a shout out to was Alex Albon saying that he's better than everyone else. And it was in the context of talking about his tires, but it was just funny taken out of context. And I loved that he was saying that. And it was also his birthday, so very exciting for him that he got points. Doohan got a 10-second time penalty for forcing Hadjar off track. And then the last main talking point was Lando having to nurse a brake issue for the last several laps. Even a couple more corners, and I think he would have lost the P2 to Russell. He had pulled like an 8 or 9 second gap on Russell, but by the end, when they finished, there was only like 1 second, a little bit over a second between them. So literally a couple more corners, and Russell would have gotten him. Our top 10 finishing was Piastri, Norris, Russell, Verstappen, Leclerc, Hamilton, Ocon, Kimi Antonelli, Albon, and Berman. So very exciting double points for Haas. Another great showing from Kimi Antonelli. But in what became a shocking turn of events, Leclerc and Gasly were both disqualified for weight breaches, and then subsequently Hamilton was disqualified for a skid block breach because his was under the minimum thickness required, which is so brutal to have both Ferrari cars out and disqualified from the Chinese Grand Prix. I just cannot imagine a worse situation. At least there was the sprint, so Lewis could feel the high that he felt, and well deservedly so. But can you just imagine? I mean, horrible. So the podium remains the same, but the ones elevated were Ocon, Antonelli, Albon, and Berman. And it also moved Stroll and Sainz into the points. So for my MVP, got to give it to Oscar Piastri. Like, what a show, getting his maiden pole and then just having an incredible start and pulling ahead of everyone. And it was quite a quiet race from him. Like, I think we only heard a couple words from him on the radio the entire race. And the one thing we did hear, David Coulthard was like, I love it. He is such a clear communicator. Like, what a dream for the race engineer. I think he just said, like, I think the only thing he said on the radio was, I'm planning to stay out. I can stay out. And so that's what he did. And boy, did he. So good for him. Incredible, especially after the heartbreak in Australia at his home race the past weekend. So I'm so happy for Oscar. And I dare say we have a title fight on our hands, not just between Oscar and Lando, but that's the important one within the team dynamics. So we're going to see how that continues to play out. I think McLaren got lucky that they didn't have to enforce any team orders with Lando's brake pedal issue, but you could imagine how that would have gotten messy if Lando was able to catch him and they were going to race till the end. So I think McLaren got lucky on that one. For my LVP, I have to give it to two that are kind of related. So first, Racing Bull's strategy. The Racing Bull car looked incredible. Both drivers were crushing it. Isaac Hadjar was right up there with Yuki, really impressed by his performance so far. But their strategy and their pit timing just tumbled them out of the points when it really looked like they were in contention for potentially a double points finish. So I don't think that finish was representative of how well the drivers performed this weekend. And then relatedly, Liam Lawson, it feels a little bit like rubbing salt in the wound to give him the LVP, just because we know how poorly he's performed so far this season, qualifying last and also just finishing last a lot of the times of the rookies and just not doing what he needs to do. And with the rumors that he may be replaced by Yuki as soon as the Japanese Grand Prix, which is the next race, so tough. But I kind of think if you're the rookie who's being promoted to the Red Bull seat next to Max Verstappen, like you have to come out swinging, and he just has not done it. So it's a bummer, but yeah, really would love to see more from him, and hopefully he'll have the chance to prove himself, even if he does lose the seat. For my hot takes and how those held up, my double Ferrari top five was a miss, but I will say it was a narrow miss before the DQ. Leclerc and Hamilton were fifth and sixth, respectively, so could have been close. And with Lewis's sprint win, I think feeling okay. So some quick quali highlights before we get into the race discussion points. So for sprint quali, Lewis pole, just an absolute magical moment. It was the fastest lap in history at Shanghai. And it was just amazing to see how happy he was. And just, yeah, when Lewis is winning in red and on the top step, I feel like there's nothing better in the world. Obviously, as a Lewis fan, I feel that way, but it just all makes sense. It feels like two greats coming together and realizing their full potential. But for Q3, the knockouts we had were Liam Lawson, of course, rough for him. He had to abort his last flying lap because he understeered, so that was just his mistake. And we had Doohan, Gasly, Ocon, and Hulkenberg also out. So it was nice to see Bortoleto get into Q2 over Hulkenberg. I always love to see rookies outperforming their teammates in some capacity. But he was knocked out of Q2 alongside Sainz, Alonso, Berman, Hadjar, who also had a similar moment to Bortoleto that ruined his lap. For Q3, Max only got one lap in, and it was good enough for P2 and only 0.018 seconds behind Lewis's pole, but it was not enough to take it from Lewis. And Lewis just couldn't believe it on the radio. He was just laughing like, really? And Lando unfortunately made a big mistake on his final flying lap, so had to scrap the lap. We saw a decent amount of mistakes from Lando this weekend, which is interesting. So hopefully he's going to come back and be less rattled. I saw a meme about Lewis that was like, bro finally pressed the K1 button. So our top 10 starting grid for the sprint: Hamilton, Verstappen, Piastri, Leclerc, Russell, Norris, Antonelli, Tsunoda, Albon, and Stroll. For the main quali, it was Oscar's first ever pole. He also beat Lewis's fastest lap from the day prior. I honestly can't believe that it was his first pole. He seems like he's been up there before, and I'm just so happy for him. And he's so chill, just like takes it in stride and is like, yep, I'm here. For Q1 knockouts, we had Gasly, Berman, Doohan, Bortoleto, and Lawson. The track was getting faster, so Yuki set the fastest time at the end, then Hadjar beat him, then Norris, so it was fun to see the track get rubbered in and faster. Another brutal one for Liam. And there were a couple rookies that made it into Q2. It was Kimi and Isaac Hadjar. But in Q2, we had Norris set the fastest lap around the circuit, and the Ferraris looking like they were struggling a bit with grip, but they did both make it through. We had Ocon, Hulkenberg, Alonso, Stroll, and Sainz knocked out. And then amazing lap from Piastri, who just managed to top himself at the end as well and get pole. Also a huge lap from George to sneak into P2, only 0.08 seconds behind Piastri and sandwiching the two McLarens. And I've been loving George's performance so far this season. And I've been laughing at people talking about how George is just like always sort of there and succeeding. Like he's snuck onto the podium twice. He's like snuck in there. But when are we going to give George the credit he deserves? I mean, he has driven incredibly well in a car that is not the best car on the grid, although I will say the Mercedes looks better than it has in quite some time. But George deserves it. Like, let's give him the credit he deserves. And getting double podiums in qualifying P2, yeah, maybe there's just something about his personality that makes us feel like he's snuck in there and he doesn't necessarily deserve it. And maybe because we don't hear as much from him on the radio, or yeah, I don't really know what it is, but justice for George. But the main thing I was thinking about is when you have both Racing Bulls in Q3 and then Lawson consistently qualifying last, it's a bad look. So our starting order, we had Piastri on pole, Russell, Norris, Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, Hadjar, Antonelli, Tsunoda, and Albon. And I loved Oscar's radio. He was like, I just had a little scream in my helmet. I'll spare your eardrums, but it was so funny. So a couple race discussion points. I think number one is the number one driver at Ferrari and McLaren. We have had the quote unquote underdogs. Now, I don't know if you can ever call Lewis an underdog as a 7-time world champion, but Charles Leclerc has been the Ferrari golden boy, has the longest contract in the team's history, et cetera, et cetera. So especially also because he's using a new power unit, very new car, very new team. He is sort of the underdog in this situation. Him and Oscar just kind of outperforming in a lot of ways over the weekend. Obviously, Oscar P2 in the sprint and then pole for the race and then winning the race to Lando's P2. And then Lewis sprint pole, sprint win. And the race, maybe not as good. And maybe in the race, not as much dominance there. But interesting to see what's going to happen there. I think it's a debate we're going to be having all season until it becomes very clear that one driver better standings. And I also want to talk about Mercedes. I think, kind of speaking of Lewis, this is the dream start to the season for them in terms of starting a new era after the person who has been their entire personality, entire storyline, entire everything has left, to start the season with 2 podiums with George, clearly the most dominant rookie in the field in Kimi Antonelli, and a car that looks better than it has in a very long time. I think it's an absolute dream for Mercedes to start the season. And I think I said this in the Australian Grand Prix recap as well, but I think Toto is probably feeling very smart and feeling confident in George as the number 1 driver, and then also in Kimi and taking that risk there instead of, taking a Sainz or someone else. So I think it's really exciting for Mercedes, and I'm eager to see what they can do next. Another interesting outperformer in my mind so far this season is Lance Stroll. He's been right up there with Alonso in the qualifying sessions. Unfortunately, Alonso has had 2 DNFs so far in the 2 races we've had, so not much to compare in terms of race performance, but he's been right up there with Alonso in qualifying, outqualified and beat him in the sprint as well. And his nursing of those tires to make a one-stop work. Unfortunately, the strategy and the timing just didn't play out in his favor, but Lance Stroll, ladies and gentlemen, he's sitting number 9 in the championship right now. So let's see how that develops. But maybe Aston Martin's supremacy will still potentially exist in 2026 with Honda, Adrian Newey, Fernando Alonso, and Lance Stroll if he continues this performance. So let's see. I can't believe I'm even saying that, but good for him. The other main talking point here is, of course, the Racing Bulls performance and Liam Lawson. So the Racing Bulls have been performing great. I said in the last recap that the Racing Bull looks as fast as the Red Bull almost, and maybe that's just because Liam Lawson has been underperforming and Yuki and Isaac have been overperforming. I don't know. But when it comes to Liam Lawson, the rumors that Yuki could replace Liam as soon as Japan, which is his home race, is pretty crazy. I mean, Helmut Marko's comments of Yuki is a different Yuki from before. He's in the form of his life. The fact that it's his home race. I would love to see Yuki in that seat. I don't know. I mean, the question I'm wondering is if it weren't Japan, if it weren't Yuki's home race, would they give Liam an extra race or 2, given he is a rookie, given Australia was kind of hard to judge anything at all? Would they give him an extra race? Or is the home race dynamic for Yuki too good of a situation to pass up? I mean, I'm sure Red Bull is not making decisions just based off of hometown vibes, but I think it's an interesting question, and it plays into Yuki's favor that it is Japan the next race. So I do wonder if we will be seeing Liam in white and Yuki in blue the next race. And then the last thing is just all these kind of midfield teams performing really well, like Haas double points, a little bit of an Ollie redemption arc. He didn't do a ton in Australia, as we saw, but loved that he drove from the back of the grid into the points. I didn't love the chow on the radio like multiple times. It felt a little bit much for my taste, but good for him. These drivers are, they're feeling good, and he performed really well. So I guess good for him to be able to say whatever he wants. So for the standings, where are we at? For drivers, we have Lando Norris with 44 points, Max Verstappen 36, George Russell 35, Oscar Piastri 34. So very tight between those. And then Kimi Antonelli and Charles Leclerc tied at 18, Lewis Hamilton at 17. So there's a lot to play for here. And we have Alex Albon, Lance Stroll, and Esteban Ocon rounding out the top 10. For constructors, we have McLaren with 78, Mercedes P2 pulling ahead a little bit of Red Bull with 53, Red Bull 36, Ferrari 35, so quite tight there as well. Williams 12, They're in P5. That was my hot take for the season. So let's see if that comes true. Aston Martin with 8, Haas 7, Kick Sauber 6, already beating their entire total for last season. Racing Bulls 3, and Alpine is pointsless, the only team that is pointsless. So my hot takes for Japan, which I know is not in 2 weeks, but I'm going to give them to you early. So I think Yuki is going to replace Liam Lawson. I think if those rumors are already circulating out there, if Autosport is already reporting on it, I think there's a high likelihood of that, especially given the home race dynamic. So I think Yuki's going to replace Liam Lawson in the Red Bull seat, and I am going to give you a hotter take. I'm going to give you that and raise you that Yuki beats Max Verstappen in Japan. Now, I know that is incredibly hot and crazy, but I'm here for it. Diving into F1 Academy, for qualifying, we had Maya Vug on pole, the Ferrari driver. She raced in F1 Academy last year as well. It was a great day for Ferrari with her on pole and then also Lewis on pole. I think the highlight of quali was a P3 for Alba Larson, 16 years old, her first weekend in F1 Academy, one of the youngest drivers on the grid. So huge for her. And we had Dorian Pain, who was in between them, starting P2, about 0.5 seconds back from Maya. For race 1, 13 laps, reverse grid order start. So Nina Godeman started first, followed by Ella Felbermeyer on the front row. Nina had an amazing start, a huge move from Chloe Chambers around the outside, and then Alicia Palmowski went up the inside. It was really sad that Shu Wei, the wild card from China, got beached at turn 7 on lap 1, so she couldn't finish the race, caused a safety car, which erased Nina Gademan's lead at that point. There was another yellow flag and a safety car caused by Leah Block making contact with Aurelia Nobles, and that's unfortunate because they were teammates, so Aurelia had to retire. There was a moment on the radio with Palmowski where she was like, I have a really loud beeping in my ear. I'm not sure if there's anything we can do to stop that. If not, no worries. And I was like, could you imagine an F1 driver being that nice on the radio? Like, literally never. But I'm like, girl, demand what you need to demand. And lap 8, Chloe Chong ran into the back of Nicole Havdro, which caused another safety car. So there were lots of safety cars in this race. And Nina Gademan, literally on the second to last lap, had a technical issue on her car. After almost a perfect race, she just tumbled down out of the points. So Alicia Palmowski won with huge defending against Chloe Chambers till the very last finishing line. She was really right up there, neck and neck. But Alicia really deserved that. And then we had Chloe Chambers P2 and Maya Vug in P3. And then for race 2, it was a dominant win from Dorian Pain, and then Maya Vug in P2, Chloe Chambers P3. So no rookies on the race 2 podium. We had a safety car at the end of the first lap and several retirements throughout the race. But one of the other highlights was Alba Larson, who finished P4. It was very close to my podium hot take, but I'm really liking what we're seeing from Alba Larson so far in the Tommy Hilfiger car. Incredible to see these ladies race their first weekend of the year and went really well. So excited to see them keep going. With that, I know this is a little bit of a shorter episode, but Nairobi calls and I have lots of things to do. So I will be back next week with an interview. And then, of course, after that, with a Japanese Grand Prix recap the week after. So stay tuned and thank you guys so much for tuning in. Talk to you soon.